Thank you so much, backstage. And hello, Ali. It's a pleasure for you to be here. Hello, everyone in the audience. So, I'm Maia Benzimra. I'm the co founder of Benzimra Co, and we are a Web3 native strategy, marketing, and technical consultancy. And we support on chain businesses to build, launch, and scale. This is the third episode of the Founders Ledger, a platform for the voices in Web3 who are doing the groundwork and driving professionalism within our industry. We'll use this space to provide founders with valuable advice and knowledge. And today we have Ali Khan, who is the emerging tech principal at AS Legal. If you wouldn't mind just giving an introduction, Ali, and letting people know who you are and what you do.
Sure thing, Mayor. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you so much for having me. So I have been driving the emerging tech side of AS Legal for the best part of the last 5 years. It was formed just at a time when virtual assets and emerging tech in general was finding a new lease of its life in the sense of coming out of COVID and suddenly laws and regulations had to pay attention to the fact that this groundbreaking technology was here that was going to change the paradigm of the way society worked. I thought, okay, well, I can't think of a more fun or interesting arena to be a lawyer in than in an area where you're dealing with frontier laws. So we've been doing that for 5 years. We're headquartered in Dubai in the UAE, with a presence in various different parts of the world. We are in the process of getting our SRA license in the UK over the course of the next 12 months. So we'll be able to service that corridor in particular, and we're capable of servicing other corridors, for example, from the UAE through to the US, where interesting things are happening over through our network.
Amazing. And I always like to kick off with a bit of an introduction as to how we met, the type of work we do together, because everyone that comes on to the Founders Ledger, we generally have a strong working relationship, a partnership, and a history within the industry together. And often it's people that have been in this space kind of since day one, who have been building really incredible things. So let's just backtrack a bit. So you and I met in, I believe, in Coco's in Camden, probably at the early hours of the morning at one of the after parties at ZB Live. And I think my initial impression of you was just like, this guy's got a lot of integrity, really super interesting work. And I think ever since then, we pretty much started collaborating, even from like a high level touch point. So that was a great night. And it was really nice to meet you. And we've actually been working together, you and I, on the Benzimra Co setup, and you've been helping us a lot in the UAE. And something that I've been very appreciative of you is not only do you provide that legal structure and framework, but you've been very supportive, as you have mentioned, as a founder to founders. And that's been such a wonderful experience working with you, because it's like, not only because can I trust you as our legal counsel, but something that I've very much enjoyed with working with you is that you seem to really have our best interest, both me and my co-founder. And, we've spent multiple hours sitting and being in the middle of some really tough conversations. So I'd love for you to touch upon that a little bit around that work that you do, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, sure, of course. Maybe I can give a wider context into how that ties in and into why I do what I do. For me, virtual assets, when they came about, were an incredible opportunity to create a new medium or plateau for the world to be able to try, at least to try and do it a different way. Before I'd done virtual assets, I've done lots of weird and wonderful things. A human design theorist would say I'm one of those manifesting generator types who will go away and just do lots of
Ooh, I'm also a manifesting generator.
different.
Industrial.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And so I'd studied Arabic and history as an undergraduate, and that meant I lived in Damascus in Syria in my year abroad, which completely changed my world from 2009 to 2010. And I became very entrepreneurial there. I was involved in.
Oh,
Um,
we've lost you, Ali.
oh,
There we go. You're
there.
back.
Right, sorry about that. So I was
No
in.
worries.
So I was in Syria 2009 2010, and I was involved in helping setting up Syria's first English language daily newspaper. And that experience of being entrepreneurial in frontier spaces where it wasn't the easiest thing to just set something up really sort of set the tone for how I thought one could actually help bring some sort of, I wouldn't say the word change. I think at the time I would have used the word change, but I think you grow into realizing, yeah, everything always changes. And then, when I got back to the UK, the war started in Syria, and I realized, it's really important to really recognize how the systems of the world work and what things are operating that prevent happy healthy people from leading happy healthy lives no matter where they're from or who they are. And I got, I trained as a barrister, got called to the bar, and immediately life took me to Dubai, where I worked for DLA Piper for 3 years, again, working on this frontier idea of common law to civil code, which is, a big part of what one does when one operates in the UAE. Especially as a litigator originally, and again, it was about frontier. It was about how can you serve, how can you be, and I found that whilst I really loved the work and I really enjoyed being at DLA Piper, I was much more suited for smaller environments at the time. So me and some friends helped set up a music festival in the UAE. We built Wasla, the alternative Arab music festival, where we built a platform for musicians and artists to help provide a regen. All right, my
Right,
apologies.
crux of the story.
Yeah, the crux of it goes to the point that after having led to a point of doing many different things from music festivals, newspapers, etc., I kept seeing the same problem, which was trying to find capital, trying to find liquidity to help businesses operate and found in a way where that constraint wasn't necessarily limiting to great ideas that needed to be had. Um, Led me to virtual assets. It led me to the idea of what if there's another economy where we had new structures of governance, where really antiquated ideas of the way law operated didn't have to affect the way that founders operated and built businesses. And so that led to doing some early stage work on governance structures, early stage work on how to build fairer environments. I was hugely fascinated by what ETH were doing in the early days. And so that led through to a point where when AS Legal started, the entire basis was providing that fractional general counsel service to founders, such that you were in part there to help them with understanding and navigating laws and regulations that were changing every 4 months, every 5 months, every 6 months in an inherently international sector where different laws affect you all the time, but also to help navigate the stress of how to do that, right? You
Yeah.
know, I don't think it's unfair to say that about 90% of startups one sees are a proxy for therapy, right? As in, it's one stage or another, somebody goes through some hell. They say, you know what, I need to alchemize all that energy into a startup and make something valuable out of it. Well, that's great. That's fantastic. That's really useful and constructive energy. But then how do you actually navigate that out of yourself as a founder and into something where you're doing it of service and of building something bigger than yourself, where you get other stakeholders involved, where you're not limited just by your passion, by your energy, but you start serving an energy that you're out there. Now, that's a process. That's a process that one has to go through. It's a process one has to learn. And it's a process that if you have learned that or have been in the process where you've learned it yourself, you can help on an equal measure others to go through that themselves. And that's the way you evolve new spaces like Web3 from a series of egos into an industry, an ecosystem that is of service to a wider pool of stakeholders. So yeah, and that seeing that evolution happen over the course of the last 5 years has been absolutely fascinating. It's been amazing.
Yeah, and I think honestly, the way that you approached it with us, anyway, I'm sure that there's some similar practice, but it was highly professional, helping us navigate, as co-founders, which side of the business would be more important for us to manage, and really testing us to be very direct in our desires about where we want to be as a company. So I think you really went above and beyond for us. And I really enjoyed the way that you worked. It was a little bit like therapy. But at the end of the day, it was mentorship, and it enabled us to have a very clear picture around the company setup. And what I really like about you and your experience is that you've obviously got a lot of experience in the UK and in the UAE, which was ideal for us, having the fact that we were set up between the UK and the UAE, and you were able to provide a lot of advice throughout those regions. So yeah,
Hmm.
just generally super impressed with how you approach things. And I think like you were saying before, there are a lot of egos in this space. And I think the way that you approach it is that you're able to cut through that and get really to the heart of the company, what they're trying to achieve, and provide the best advice and setup legally for them, um, which is very, very important work.
Yeah, and also knowing that, yeah, for example, often in this space, perfection can be a real problem, right? Saying, okay, well, look, this isn't perfect. But at the same time, a real aversion to trying to get high standards is also a problem. So, trying to really get to a place where you balance out. It's amazing to me that for a lot of founders, their first foray into founding a company is Web3, because it is one of the most complicated, complex arenas to be a founder, right? It's decentralized. It is by nature egoless. Anybody you go across who says, "Oh, I'm one of the original OGs of crypto," there's millions of OGs of crypto. There's by nature of the way crypto works, you haven't met everybody who you were once upon a time in a Discord chat with, right? It is bigger than all of us. It is a system that was created or evolved into what it is by nature of it being decentralized. And then once you get that space where it's decentralized and you're building something, it's the most tempting thing on earth to say, "Yeah, I'm the big kahuna in the room. I'm the person who's building this platform or that platform." And it's natural. It happens absolutely. But then the problem there is that you're building something and putting yourself forward for something that is incredibly legally complex, incredibly complex from a regulatory point of view. Your product itself is the most complicated thing that has come about from a legal concept since who knows what. It's like dealing with nuclear matter as a startup, right? So making sure you have folks in the room that are capable of helping you, from to navigate all that is so hugely important. Um, and there's a real lack of that happening at the moment in terms of those startups that are coming up saying, "Oh, we're going to build an exchange, we're going to build an OTC desk, oh, we're going to build a new project that is going to be like a privacy coin that's going to do this and the other." Well, cool. And then they often say, "You know what? Our approach to this is we're going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission." Okay, completely understand that is the startup mentality, and that's great. But the world has caught up to the challenge you're putting forward to them, right? This is a challenge. This is an extant challenge to an extant system. And let's not beat around the bush. People don't sit back and clap and applaud saying, "Wow, great effort. You've managed to completely challenge the way payment rails work. Good for you. Off you go now." That's not the way it works, right? It gets harder, meaner, nastier. It gets realer, right? That's not a word. It gets more real. So the point being, you've got to really arm up and take a look at it and take it seriously, right? This isn't just a fun thing that you're doing that is a project across various people. Very quickly, it turns very serious. That's stressful, and that's really emotionally taxing for a lot of founders who weren't quite prepared for the enormity of what they're dealing with. And so often they say, "Right, you know what my strategy is now? I'm just going to build and get as much capital as I can to get as many regulatory licenses as possible, so I can just sell as a package a company that has got a bunch of licenses." Well, fine, but that is also not as simple as that as well. You've got to maintain those licenses. You've got to maintain an operation, etc. You've got to maintain compliance functions. You've got to make sure that your marketing is completely within the scope not only of your jurisdiction, but multiple jurisdictions to whom you're marketing to. It's getting more and more complex. And on top of that, what's getting more complex is that a lot of these jurisdictions do not have harmony between them in terms of how they look at what Web3 is, how they look at what virtual assets are, how they look at what activities are from a financial services point of view. What is a security? What isn't a security, etc. So it's not as simple as getting on chain and building something cool and thinking, oh, this is going to be able to make me money, right? And I
Yeah,
really, and you know, you've seen this as well, Mayor, many, many times over, where you've got talented founders with talented ideas who start to get wading through the mud because the commercial pressures of having to navigate the reality of this means that they start having to veer off into odd directions and maybe do things that they didn't want to set out to do, but they kind of have to do to keep it alive. Um,
absolutely.
being able to be there as that presence and you know and a grounding anchor and also like a frankly sorry about my French here, but a bullshit detector as well
Yeah,
is fundamentally important when it comes to helping founders navigate a world of incredible complexity.
yeah. And there's some interesting things you touched upon that I'd like to dive in a little bit more into. It's like you seem to have a pretty clear understanding of the scope and the nature between something that is more decentralized and more centralized. Having worked with decentralized financial products for a long time, there was obviously a lot of loopholes that were available to some of these protocols. I'm sure that that landscape has changed quite a lot. There was clear regulatory, well, as clear as it could be, pathways for centralized models. But when it did come to the decentralization aspect, it was almost like a lot more asking for forgiveness, like you just said. So,
Mm.
have you seen a major shift in the inception of decentralized protocols and financial products to maybe now with like you said, the ETH Foundation? I mean, that's the prime example of a DAO that's actually been highly successful. I wonder what kind of regulatory compliance they had to go through, if any. um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
it's
I'd love to know a bit more about, pick your brain on that a little bit, because that's very
It is
interesting.
interesting, yeah. The to start off with, decentralized means many things to many people, right? Truly decentralized, from a legal point of view, is something which doesn't have legal personality, and to which the individuals or the parties involved in that protocol don't have legal personality either. Now, let's actually just pause there for a second. What that means is you are trusting as a participant in this protocol, you are trusting the protocol to have enough integrity in its structure that you don't even need to know who the other parties are. You trust the code enough that you're not going to get screwed over, right? If you invest your or deposit your capital into these protocols, and increasingly, the sort of the way trust has worked in the sector has been fascinating. It kind of has re-centralized almost naturally, not just because laws and regulations have squished it in, but because a lot of the market dynamics and activities of various different market participants and the complexity has meant that increasingly more and more people don't have time to investigate what they can trust and go back to old models of what is trustworthy, right? So increasingly we start seeing centralization. Hey, I am a lawyer. I am regulated by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority of the United Kingdom. Therefore, trust me. Great, that took 5 seconds, as opposed to a couple of hours of investigating who I am, what I'm about, etc. Right?
Um,
So we
Barrier
start
to entry. Yeah.
exactly. So we start creating barriers to entry, and we start
Mm.
creating decentralization. And so even in established old DeFi protocols, um, more and more of the market are looking at re-centralization as a necessity. Now, what that also means is from a legal perspective, a regulatory perspective, that then also has started creating walled gardens around what is centralized and what is decentralized. DeFi is not something which, no matter what market says what explicitly, that the absolute truth is no state or authority or jurisdiction is ever going to explicitly say we are pro DeFi, because that doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything at all. Like your laws are specifically only capable of being engineered towards centralization, right? The moment I no longer exist as an ego, the moment I am decentralized, you don't know me as anything other than a wallet address. Um, I am beyond the arena where laws and regulations take place. But the moment you can identify me, which is very easy actually to identify who I am,
Yeah.
suddenly the laws exist. I'm sat currently in the south of London, and therefore English jurisdiction applies to XYZ that I say or do. Um, and there's an interesting, just because we're on this point. One of the things I'm absolutely fascinated by is the dynamics of social movements, right?
Mhm.
Like Web3 was a form of revolution for our generation. It was a revolution that we could actively participate in without much blood being shed, right? It was a way to set a challenge across and a shot across the bow to systems where generations who are, Gen Z or millennials, etc., who felt that the economy is just not doing what it should do for our generations could start fighting back in a different way. So let's
Mm.
think of it in a second as a form of revolution. Now, let's compare it to other revolutions, say the French Revolution, right? In 1789, the French Revolution officially supposedly started, and that's because that was the year that the guillotine was cutting off people's heads, executions of the royalty were taking place, the storming of the Bastille, this grand explosion of agency suddenly fills through the streets of France, and people, individuals that were once sort of stuck under the structures of the old way, were suddenly given this liberation, this freedom. And that, let's compare that to maybe, I don't know, 2017, 2018, right? And then that led to, or maybe even later, let's say 2020, let's say COVID, right? And then the market's shooting up. And what that led to was the sans culottes, literally in French, the trouserless, aka the degens of the French Revolution. These degenerate, trouserless, free people running around France with full
Mhm.
freedom, capable of having their economic agency, their political agency, and suddenly, saying, wow, we suddenly have our own power, our self sovereignty. That
Mm.
led to a mess called the White Terror, where markets went completely to hell. Robespierre himself, the Sam Bankman-Fried of the time, had his head cut off. As once the leader, is now the enemy number one, and that led to this mass bloodshed that needed, as we're seeing at the moment, some re-centralization. Right,
Mm.
that's a period called the Directorate, and the Directorate was when, wow, all this chaos and all this self sovereignty and all this freedom is just a lot. How do we make life easier for ourselves? Let's re-centralize a bit and re-centralize power into a block of folks. Yes, the revolution happened. No, there is no more king for now, but we're re-centralizing things to make things happier. And what did that lead to? It was the perfect plateau for Napoleon, right?
Mm. Mm.
Stablecoins, CBDCs. And
Yeah.
that's where we are at right now. We're at this grand re-centralization where crypto is Napoleon entering into Europe, challenging Swift, challenging MasterCard, challenging Visa, making every big bank in the world turn around and say, okay, Napoleon's here, right? And it's going to change the world. And meanwhile, one has to ask, like in every revolution, well, I wonder what's happening to that sans culotte farmer who once had all the agency and is now, in a different world. So that's the dynamic of every single big mass movement that has happened. We're seeing it now. And so it's just one of those things where market participants, founders, leaders, etc., have to notice and navigate these things as relevant to the way they run their businesses, to the way they're going to navigate the next 12 to 18 months. And it takes folks who are interested not just in, the smart contract, but also the context of the smart contract
Yeah.
to be able to help provide that advice.
I think you touched upon, I mean, that was just very wonderfully put, all of that. It was almost like old tales, nursery rhymes, wrapped up into the financial ecosystem with a touch of historical
They're all
nature. I
stories.
love
Everything's a
Amazing.
story. Everything's a
Yeah,
story.
no. I mean, if we actually think about it logically, and I love that comparison because if you do look back at in history, there are lots of patterns, and it does repeat itself in ways many times. So, um, what you were touching upon before about how a decentralized entity, of course, it can't be registered or regulated or um, perceived in the light of law because we need these foundations around them to even that we've built throughout centuries, right? And it's we're at this critical point, like you said, where the original crypto that we saw that was heavily adopted by retail audience, it was very much the Wild West. We were provided financial freedom in a way that maybe wasn't the most productive because let's be honest, there was some huge I'd say real failures on in the Web3 space in the last year significantly. Um, and now as we move into a more safeguarded professional use of this technology, I mean, this is something that I'm personally really excited about, having worked in institutional decentralized finance and being more on that side of the pond anyway.
Mhm.
Um, but I'd be very interested to know from your perspective, as a bit of a futurist conversation, where do you see the retail side? Because I think it's very clear that this technology is being adopted by, like you were saying, some of the largest institutions and banks for better payment rails, faster, trading, and the fact that smart contracts are generally so innovative and can be used in a much more regulated way.
Mhm.
But where does that leave the degens, the trouserless individuals, as you put them, and where does that look in the next few years?
Well, I mean, just full disclaimer here. I'm also wearing shorts right now as well, so I'm one of the gents.
We have to
Uh,
in the heat, right? It's
Heat,
absolutely
absolutely.
boiling.
Um, it's a good question. I had I've also separately from Web3 as part of my practice seen a lot of interesting evolutions happening with regards to communities and networks being built, right? So, one of the other theses that came through was this restructuring of the way the world is working. Centralization, hyper centralization is just no longer possible in quite the same way that it had been.
Mm,
And yes, there is, in my view at least, the constant concern of Web 2 central data repositories like Amazon and in Meta, etc., having the power that they do have, day by day, unfettered, less and less fettered, just completely in control power. But
yeah.
I think there's a critical mass at which point people will just say, okay, enough, and decentralize into sort of syndicate networks. And I'm starting to see that. A lot of traditional VCs were writing about what was going to matter. About a year ago, a lot of stuff was written about building your community, building your network, and your network being the environment within which that was investable. It was not only your market, it was your stakeholder network, it was also your sort of credibility ring that was capable of being built. And that's not to say that you just belong to one network, you might belong to many networks, right? Now imagine in that world where suddenly these networks, which are walled gardens of value, um, they start to generate, interest. They start to say, we're going to pool our capital together. We're going to build, ways in which we will invest collectively as this network into things that we care about. Well, how do we fractionalize governance and power, etc., of that. Okay, well, here we're going to start tokenizing it. And I don't think that the tokenization of networks and communities will be as readily thrown onto exchanges as they were over the course of the last 5 years, which I think was it, one would say the word premature. It wasn't premature. People were doing it for a reason. People wanted to do it. People needed to do it. That's fine. But
Nice point.
from a systemic point of view, it wasn't. It's evidently wasn't mature enough to be able to self-sustain the ebbs and flows of a market using it, healthily. And it'll happen eventually, but in the last 5 years, it was very new, fresh, and adolescent energy. Let's put it that way. It was in the space. So more communities, whether it is White Leaf Cricket Club or whether it is a network of guys on Wall Street, are going to be thinking about how to create tokens of value and power in amongst themselves that are quick, that are liquid, that are safe, and that allow
Yeah.
for a quicker mechanism of decision making to happen than what currently exists. That's when tokens will start again to see the light of day as value, except this time we now have a ton of laws and regulations preventing huge swathes of these tokens very quickly being put onto exchanges. So the parties that are creating these tokens aren't doing
Mm.
it for the gamble of what tokens were in the last X few years. They'll be doing it because they genuinely see the use case and the utility for it to be able to use as a value to their community. A very basic model of that is already being seen with regards to real estate tokenization, right? And it's nothing new. I mean, this isn't sort of like groundbreaking, listen to my TED Talk stuff. I mean, this is stuff that has been happening for years. People have had timeshares, fractional ownership,
Yep.
concept of
Absolutely.
tenancies, joint tenancies has been going on for ages, right? So it's just all that does is just really unsexily turn the blockchain into a place where you can very quickly create immutability about this. No more drama than that. There doesn't need to be this Steve Jobs moment on stage for this. And that's what's going to happen. It's never with a big bang. It's going to be with a whimper that these things start infiltrating our economy and being used, right? And the question is, who's in the space for the hype and the sexiness, and who's in the space because they genuinely think actually this is really compelling and interesting. And we're going to start seeing that difference happen.
Yeah, and I think we already are. I
Yeah.
mean, you said it very well. It's like this isn't necessarily an innovation in regards to what we're tokenizing, but it's about the tokenization, about it being on chain, and about it being, tradable 24 hours and in decentralized manner.
Mhm.
That's really what is going to change capital markets as a whole, and we are seeing it already. So I agree. That's how I perceive the future to be. Um, I do, I do speculate if we're going to see anything like we have in the meme craze, the NFT craze, the alt craze. Like, is there room for another one of those crazy moments in crypto, or do you think that that's done?
I I mean, the reason why I say I hope not is because I fundamentally believe a large part of the energy behind those crazes were, and I wouldn't use the word craze. They were people really cared about them. People really cared about them. People a lot of their lives on the line
Yeah,
for them. But
we all did.
post COVID energy. I mean, let's not forget, Mayor. As in, we were locked in for quite a while, where for the first time in however many years of history. And there was this scary thing floating around in the air that was, you know, capable of really seriously harming, maybe even killing our loved ones. And we kept calm and we
Yeah.
carried on, and eventually we came out. Obviously, that's going to have subconscious effects. And the great grand
Mm,
liberation of energy that happened after that, in terms of saying, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to do that, and we're going to make this happen, we're going to that happen, there was a lot of freneticism, a huge amount of
right.
freneticism, right? And that
Yeah.
phoneticism sometimes exists for a number of months or years. And it was what, 3 years of freneticism for about 2 years of on and off lockdowns. Um, and
Mm,
if there is another mass global cataclysm that leads to this sort of thing, yes, we're going to find crazes again. This happens, right? Um, I hope that doesn't happen in quite the same way. I don't think we're going to find the same pattern breaking frenzies as we did. But I do think we're going to find very interesting new models and products coming out very soon that are just not that sexy. Like, I find it sexy, but I have I have a very weird
Yeah.
sort of idea of what is interesting or not. But like DePIN, for example, decentralized physical infrastructure, you start looking at folks like SF Connect or SF Compute in San Francisco who are building an exchange for DePIN tokens, right? You start looking at um, the way in which compute is becoming is may well become currency, and what's stopping that from happening, or what is not going to stop that from happening. You start looking at that sort of space as
Absolutely.
that's where we need to be looking at as professionals in the realm of decentralization and centralization translation. That's the sort of stuff we need to be able to
Mm.
code switch between very quickly to serve, because if we don't, hyper centralization of physical infrastructure for I think we can all agree is not in everybody's interest. Hyper decentralization doesn't really serve everyone in the way that the efficiencies of centralization do. But the time for us to really grapple with this is now, because if we don't look at this quickly, we're going to miss the boat. So even if, for example, BitTensor, if Tau isn't the solution to the world's problems, at least engaging in communities that are looking at how to use the abundance of technology to solve this in the name of plurality, just surrounding yourself around people like that is going to lead naturally to environments where you start to see the real alpha and the real gold, right? And there are a number of projects out there that are trying to look at this sort of stuff in the same way. So I think the health of the sector is actually very good, despite the fact that a lot of the excess clothing, let's put it that way, that the sector has created has been
Mhm.
shed. It's still robust, it's still healthy, the technology is still abundant.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have that mindset, and it's a very refreshing place to be. I think, we've got many people that will come on this show, for example, and I can assure you that every single guest that comes on here would have the same thought process in regards to this technology. And these are the ones that have been championing it and building and actually making this something that's viable and usable and is excited about its core, rather than some of the hype and however we've described it. So I think that I'm in agreement with you across all of that. And I think something that's very interesting is it's in the data as well, because we have all these financial institutions onboarding. We're finally getting regulatory clarity, and it's not just across one nation, because obviously Switzerland, the UAE, for example, have been very forthcoming in regulating crypto and decentralized protocols and blockchain. But what we're starting to see is a trend within, at least in the Western audience. We've got the US with the Genius Act, Clarity Act. We've got the UK now actually quite aggressively running up with finally some clear regulatory clarity coming out that's going to enable financial institutions to offer crypto assets in as soon as October next year. So, considering the state of the market, which obviously on paper, if we look at where Bitcoin is, and I think we're post price speculation when it comes to this technology, and that's something I'm really happy about.
Mhm.
But if you are to speculatively look at the current situation versus what's happening on the legal and compliance side, I'd say it's a bit of a mismatch, because do you remember when this technology was very early, and as soon as a piece of news came out of something of this nature or gravitas, it would actually move the market, and that's not something that we're seeing in this cycle. But I think that actually shows a level of maturity. So, as somebody that's on the ground advising and working very closely with these regions, but also you have to be aware of everything that's going on the regulatory side, at least to some degree. I know that's not necessarily your exact point of interest, but it would be great for you to give the audience some of your intel and perspective of everything that's going on globally, really.
Yeah, 100%. Um, Gosh, wow. So we are in a very interesting time. I mean, if you play Risk, this is the part when the game gets really interesting. But you've got the US and you've got the Genius Act with regards to stablecoins and how it has structured an environment where private regulated parties, can issue dollar pegged stablecoins, making sure that they don't issue yield. That's the sort of work of the banking lobby to make sure that it is not threatened in the same way. And you've got the
Mm.
Clarity Act, which is on its way through for market structure. And, you remember, Mayor, like even about a year and a half ago, the US didn't exist in our world. Like it kind of did, but it just didn't.
Mm.
It was like, okay, well, it's America. Just they'll
You
catch
just
up.
wouldn't. You would not be advised. You would
Yeah,
not be advised to set up a crypto-related protocol
yeah.
in the US.
Yeah,
You know,
it was just like
just be a nightmare.
those are the dark land Simba. One must never go there sort of situation. Like it was like, don't touch it. And then suddenly, bang, out of nowhere, it is relevant, it is real, and it has laws and regulation. And it's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary. What's happened. Simultaneously, you've got a lot of developments happening across jurisdictions like Canada, with regards to how their approach for virtual assets is going to be taken. Behind the scenes, a lot of cross governments and cross jurisdiction work is being done, for better or for worse reasons, to sort of create this environment where there is at least some style of harmonization across. Um, the Western world. Now, the BRIC countries have their own approach to this and they have their own interest in this. There's still a lot of regulatory arbitrage in terms of what is and isn't allowable. And you'll get sort of, great leaps forward and then a lot of pushback backwards. Let's take South Africa as an example. Very interestingly, in South Africa, like a lot of the global South, where crypto or virtual assets was always said to be, well, the global north, the West, can treat this as a way to make a lot of money. For us, it's a way to leapfrog an economy and move forward. South
Mm.
Africa's slightly an interesting case with its history in terms of its infrastructure, but its desire to develop. It has capital controls, meaning there's a limit to the sort of export, the amount of money can be exported from the country. Um,
Yeah.
Part of its laws and regulations, the definition of virtual assets as money and capital is really important. And it was designated as capital for the longest time. Sorry, it was designated as money only for the longest time. It got changed to money and capital quite recently, thanks to a court decision. Without going into details here, it basically meant that the way South Africa has to look at virtual assets now is very different to its other parties in Africa. Suddenly, it's looking at it from the perspective that wow, even crypto is subject to capital controls. That's made a lot of South Africa-based crypto companies shake and think, "Gosh, wow, what does this actually mean?" And that's not even set in stone yet. That might come to pass in December, depending on what the SARB, the Reserve Bank, say on this. Meanwhile, just a few 100 miles up the road in Kenya and Rwanda, huge
Mm.
amounts of work being done on really positivist virtual asset regulatory rails. Rwanda themselves have really understood that passporting is key here in terms of saying, okay, well, look, if you're regulated in Kenya, um, fine, come and you can
Absolutely.
operate in Rwanda, and it's amazing how we're starting to see jurisdictions finally realize they're not the first guys to hear about this thing called crypto, that everyone's talking about it,
Yeah.
and then realizing, oh wow, gosh, people are actually got regulatory rails on this. maybe the quickest way to market is to allow for parties to be regulated next door to come and operate here, right?
Yeah.
And so we're seeing a lot more of that. Jordan, for example, are starting to, from what I hear, explore that in the Middle East. It would do them great service to do so. Um, but then you got to remember, every regulator has an interest in getting parties to come to them first to get licensed, right? And every
Mhm.
regulator has an interest in saying, no, it doesn't matter what you're doing in Dubai. You've got to get licensed in Jordan because that's how we get our fees, right? That's how we get our, um, how they make their money. So it's going to get harder for parties to operate internationally, um, because every jurisdiction now is getting their own regulatory frameworks together, especially across the global south, and they have some teeth.
Mm.
They have some bite. Vara, for example, this year have been on the warpath in terms of issuing penalty notices to parties who aren't even in the UAE, but that are marketing towards the UAE. And it's been quite explicit,
Mm.
many, many years, saying, look, if you're going to, I mean, one thing to be very clear, if you have an NOC or something like that from the DMCC, if you're in Dubai, you've got a VA proprietary trading vehicle, don't put the VARA sign on your website. It's not a good idea until you've got an actual
Yeah.
license from VARA. VARA are not a, nicely, it's okay sort of. They're a proper regulatory authority with proper regulatory right, and they've just really proved that in the way that they have um, issued penalties across the board. And they're doing that. Why? They're doing that because they want to protect the UAE market from parties
Quite
that may
right.
not.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So look, with that in mind, that you've then got, because VARA is starting to show its teeth, a number of other regulators across the world are starting to show their teeth as well. So it is a hard environment to work in, but that's not to say it's impossible. It just means one has to take risk-based approaches to everything. And it's not as much fun as it used
Mm.
to, but it's probably of a lot more value.
That's fascinating. So it might even start, we might even start to see certain jurisdictions acting in more of a silo than would be productive, to be honest, until we get some kind of, global recognition for standards, which will take a long time.
Yeah, the difficulty is, again, each jurisdiction is, it's very difficult for a national authority to accept the fact they're dealing with an inherently international technology, right? Um,
Yeah,
we're now
yeah,
having this conversation that could be seen in Papua New Guinea. Now, I'm not an expert on Papua New Guinea law, but there might be a law in Papua New Guinea that says any conversation about virtual assets at all is deemed to be promoting virtual assets, and therefore you need a license to do so. Well, great. We didn't know that. And if we ever set foot in Papua New Guinea and they cared about this and they kept a record of us, we might end up in trouble. And so we're living in that sort of world now where it's incredibly difficult to get an idea of that. There will be harmonization. There has to be.
mm,
It'll come probably from the same powers that it's always come from, the most powerful places when it's in their interests. But remember that arbitration, which, if you're not
mm,
aware of what arbitration is, it's not quite going to court. It's a private version of going to court where you get to set your rules on how you adjudicate a dispute, and you get an arbitrator which both parties choose. So you kind of choose your judge, and whatever happens in that forum, you both parties agree by contract that they've decided that that is going to be the outcome. You then file that in your local court to say we've had an arbitration and that's that the court should enforce this. That idea is used across the world now, but it wasn't until the 1920s that this became something that the world was ready to have. There was something called the New York Convention, which set the rules to allow all jurisdictions to be able to do this in a particular manner. And before the New York Convention, it was a total mess, as you might imagine. Every jurisdiction doing things in a particular way with different rules and different ideas. So harmonization can happen. The New York Convention is proof of that. There will be a New York Convention on virtual assets at some point. And it's just a case of having to deal with a bit of the Wild West that
Yeah.
does predate that until it happens. And we're just in that period right now.
Yeah, and we're in the period where each jurisdiction are creating rules and regulations and clarity for at least operations within that region, right? Which is
Yeah.
a lot better than it was 5 years ago. So at least we have that. And I agree that there does need to be some kind of synchronicity between all of these regulations at some point. How soon that will be, I mean, who knows?
But you know as
But
well as I
you're
do,
on the ground.
yeah, I was
Sorry?
going to say, you know as well as I do that it's really hard to get
Hmm.
clients to go from once upon a time the really fun freedom of saying, "Oh, we're going to do this, then we're going to do that, we can do this, and we're going to do that," and then
Yeah.
suddenly going from that to got to go check with the lawyers if we can do this. Got to go check with the regulators if we can do that. I've got to check with it's hard to change that culture. It's hard for me to change that culture. So like, and that's my job. So it's something which we've got to be really understanding of the industry and the sector. Rather than turn around and say, "Oh no, we were always suited and booted," and just saying, actually, it's something
Mm.
that we have to warm the sector into, say this is the new reality, this is the way it is now. It is not impossible, it just requires a different approach, right? um,
I wonder what type of new um, digital finance founders are going to come from this, because there's obviously a kind of profile type for traditional founders. So, new builders in this space. I wonder the profile types we're going to start exploring through having clearer regulation. It's going to be very
yeah,
interesting times.
absolutely, absolutely. I really hope we still have the capacity to have founders who don't need to have 7 years at a big bank, or don't need to have an MBA, or don't need to have, you know, I really hope that doesn't turn into that sort of sector. It might do, but I guess one of the things about Web3 that I've found across the board is that those of us who have been in the space, we always back the underdog. There's something about it.
I
There's
know.
something about we always are there working and supporting the underdogs, and trying to there's an underlying spirit in the space that might really surprise a lot of people looking at it from the outside in, is that the space does have a value system. It really does. A very subtle, very very quiet, but very noticeable value system exists when people speak to each other. And one big part of that value system is that there is this sense of supporting the little guy, and making sure that power is capable, or the opportunity for power is capable of being spread to anyone. um, and one of the risks of re-centralization is that eventually leads to the sort of gateways of entry being fewer and fewer. Certain
Mm.
names have to be on your CV, certain people have to be in your network, etc. And if that is the case, it is the
That like
case. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that like traditional career path of studying finance and going and working in a big hedge fund. And you know I- what I love about this space is that there is such an eclectic mix of talent and skills and individuals. And honestly, like a lot of my very good friends, I don't have that many friends that aren't in this space. Like some of my best friends are working in this industry with really colorful backgrounds. And I think honestly, the the state of entrepreneurship and the workforce is changing rapidly, just because of the fact that maybe there's not as much value as extracted from traditional university route, or there's a lot going on in that world. And I agree, that's what I've always loved about this industry, is that there's I used to always say that it's like where all the rejects of society kind of gathered and created our own industry.
Trials of us.
um, yeah, there's something really nice about that. It's definitely changing, I think, for the better, but I think we can both agree that we hope that energy, that subtle energy of supporting the underdog, doesn't disappear.
Yeah. Um, you know, you got to be able to suffer some manner of trauma or disappointment in order to empathize with somebody else's trauma or disappointment, right? Um, and you'll find the stories across the Web3 network, there's often these sort of great awakening moments, or small injustice moments that drive people to say, well, it's not good enough. Like, the old way is not good enough, right? But that's not enough. Then, it's one thing just to go back to this idea of 90% of startups are a proxy for therapy. Well, Web3 is also a giant proxy for therapy. Just saying the old world isn't enough is not enough. We're now at a place where, okay, cool, we've dropped the guillotines, we've killed the kings. Now what? What is the new France going to look like? What is the new world going to be? What are the rules that we want to see? What are the environments that we want to create that allow for us to create really exciting, fair, healthy commerce and finance happening between parties across the world, beyond borders, right? We get to say that. We might have to wait until it's manifested, but we get to say that. And that agency and that self sovereignty remains in the space as a fundamental part of the values of the space. It's just that the way we articulate it has had to evolve now. The stakes are higher. So it's fundamentally important to remember that, like any industry, it is not about one or two individuals. It's not even about any big names. It's about the health of a series of humans that operate, many of whom you'll never know, you'll never meet, that create the dynamics of what makes a market a market. And if those of us have enough agency to do something about it, we can try and create the structures that allow for that market to operate healthily. And I just think that's just a great way to spend a career, right? It's a great way to, if you're going to have to work in the day, why not build really interesting things, that might help others?
Something like that.
Exactly.
Beautifully said. Ali, it's been a real pleasure, honestly. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I think you've provided a lot of value to myself and everyone watching. I like to end each podcast with the same question for every guest, having it be that every guest has a significant amount of success and has very interesting stories, and all have an eclectic mix of knowledge. And I would like to ask you a singular question that you can take a minute to ponder on. But Ali, what mindset did you have to adopt to get to this position today, and which one did you have to leave behind?
It's a very complex question, which I can give another hour-long podcast to, but I'm going to summarize it. I had I had to let go of all of the illusions of how I thought my life, my career was going to pan out. Um, I had to let go of all the expectations of building something. I had to let go of all of the ideas of what's important. Yeah, I wanted the parties and I wanted the, boat, the yacht nights, etc., whatever. But the success came when, or started coming, when none of that really mattered. And it was a case of just fully letting go and working on something that was deeply instinctive, that I didn't have to convince myself in the morning as to putting on the maquillage to say, that's me now, I have to do this for the next 8 hours. It was just something that was me, something that I was framed and designed to do. I couldn't have done it any other way, right? If this was an act to, make some money or whatever, that's exhausting. Every play has to end at some point. Um, and so really, really getting to tune with, it turns out this is who I am. That's surprising to me. This is what I want. That's surprising to me too. But then really settling into that reality and going with that really set up a lot. And it did mean I had to let go of a lot of ideas I had of, you know, I'd be wearing a suit and tie and walking into an office somewhere in the city or in the DIFC, um, living that sort of life. But I'm very happy that this is my life. I'm very happy that this is the way of doing it. And I think that's the mindset to adopt as well. Like, if you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, this is tough, this is bloody tough, but I couldn't think of anything else that I'd honestly be doing, that's when you know you're on the right path.
Thank you so much. I think we could all take something from that. And I completely agree. The moment you start chasing money or putting on that facade and eventually the play ends, um, I think that can take a long time to recover from as an individual and as an ego. But as you begin to be authentic with yourself and your path and have the courage to explore your purpose as a human being, that's really when your career can become something that is embedded into your everyday life and something that you can get up and feel proud about working on. So,
Absolutely.
um, yeah, I could not agree more. Thank you so much, Ali. It's been an absolute pleasure. Is there any final pieces of advice maybe you'd like to provide some of the founders in all industries before we wrap up?
Yeah, you don't have to know everything. Don't pretend you do. I mean, it's impossible, right? And don't just rely on our good friends Chatty G and Claude as well. Ask, go out, just ask questions to people. Like, hey man, I've heard you're a lawyer. Just wanted to ask a quick question. Like, do you think the UAE is a really useful place to put my product in? I'm not going to turn around and say, oh no, you've got to book an appointment. Like, I love talking about this stuff anyway, so I'm likely going buy me a beer and I will absolutely talk to you about this stuff, right? Um, and you'll start to get knowledge. You start to get alpha from around the place. The best founders I know are the guys and girls who are like, I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I just know that I'm here to do it. I just need to be surrounded by people who can help me. So be that person. Like, be as vulnerable as you can be. It's amazing the stuff that comes your way if you're vulnerable.
Oof, what a note to end on. Incredible stuff, Ali. You've been truly eloquent and articulate and just an amazing storyteller. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you
Thank you very
on.
much.
Thank you
Thanks
so
so much for
much.
having me. Thank you so much, Maia.